Hello and welcome to the RSnake Show Demo Day. So today we're going to be looking at Karim Hijazi's company, Vigilocity. And something, Trey, you don't know is that I had a little offline conversation with Karim before this all started. And so I want to make sure that you're okay with this. We're going to be working within a real demo. And that's typically how this works anyway. But in this case, it's a little bit unique because we're looking at live data and just the way the product works. We had the option. We could do a lot of stuff in post and blur stuff out or put boxes over stuff or whatever. But my opinion, and I'd love to hear your take on this, is I'd rather have it be real. And this is what it really is, even if it's slightly embarrassing to some company or God forbid, actually shows that there's real exposure, like there's material breach, which is very likely. But I think it's better because this isn't rare. If it were rare, I'd say let's not do this. But because it's not rare, and basically everyone is compromised pretty much all the time, you just go down to your IT team and look at the stacks and stacks and stacks of machines down there and ask them which ones are running slow or have pop-ups or whatever. Everybody's compromised all the time. I think this is fair game. What do you think?
That sounds completely rational. I'm terrified to hear who the victim will be, but the bottom line is what we're talking about is probably out there and discoverable. And so if the bad actors are seeing the same information that could be available to the good actors, we should probably have an open conversation about it.
That was my feeling as well. So, and I think it makes for a better demo. We could have done slides, we could have made it totally neutered. I just rather it just work, and let's do it for real. I think the audience will like that better too. Okay. So with that, Karim, it is your stage, your hour.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for that. Yeah, no, great kind of disclaimer on the front, and Trey, it will probably be multiple victims as we look through this, because it sort of tends to be a flow of consciousness as this platform sort of works. So what I'll do here is do a quick intro. Probably, I suspect some of the folks that are watching this show, we're all friends, so they probably know who I am. But been in InfoSec for quite some time, cresting, good Lord, almost 30 years now, maybe even beyond that if I really start counting the early days. Had a really storied career, got involved with product development very unintentionally in the late 2008 timeframe, post Mariposa botnet takedown, which is what inspired the original company that kind of pioneered a lot of this capability. This is kind of an iterative methodology, as you guys will see here. It's evolved. And it's interesting, Trey, just as we said right before we got on camera, I haven't seen you in ages. But the last time I saw you, I had the same mission in mind here, which is to sort of identify to the best of my ability, without any kind of invasive process, who's victimized out there. And if we could help them, we could help, give the bad guys a hard time. And now that's extended. And as I'll get into with the demo, a lot of this is focused not merely on the first parties, but now the third parties in the supply chain is a big deal. And that's actually a really big part of the motivation behind this product. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and hopefully all will work well here. Let's see here. I know these are I
need like a drum roll track here.
Yeah. All good. Okay. I think we're in good shape. So, the company's called Vigilocity. It's a young company by definition, if you want to look at it from a sort of a founding standpoint, but the capability and the foundational elements go back 15 years now. And I'll explain why that is the case. And it's interesting. I had the pleasure of seeing a former demo day that you shared with me, Robert, and it was funny because everyone's going to say the same things. The problems are always effectively the same. I mean, there's always variations and flavors, but fundamentally, from my perspective, and as at least it relates to why I'm trying to solve some of these challenges, despite the best, at least proclaimed to be effective defensive tech, we're still seeing problems. It's just hard to bypass these things. And the ones that go after things like vulnerabilities, while that is absolutely a vector, the threat actors that are of note many times won't bother with those. They're going to go after people through social engineering tactics. They're going to use phishing efforts, and those are very hard to manage because that's people, as we all know. So advanced tooling does get deployed, things like Cobalt Strike, and not even malware. So we're talking about things that really can't be hunted down per se as easily. So these are things that are really problematic. Those in the industry know this very well. So it puts us kind of pitted against each other. Red teams eventually get caught by blue teams, and it becomes a big mess, and who's really malicious and who's not, and what's really going on. It can be a real problem and time suck. And then, as I mentioned just a few seconds ago, the cyber contagion aspect of things is real. You can't deny that. The fact that it's funny, I had a conversation yesterday, and people generally think when I talk about this, I'm implying that, well, should companies limit access to their networks from weak OPSEC third parties? Absolutely. But more importantly, almost now, don't share your data with weak OPSEC third parties, because there's a lot of perception that it's always this ingress concern. Everyone's always worried about who's at the fortress gates, when in reality, it's what's getting out of your fortress into insecure environments. I have this horrible analogy, but it works well, and it's quite visceral. I won't let my kids go spend the night at a house that I don't quite know how the security is in. Why would you do that with your data? So really understanding your third-party ecosystem from that perspective is as important as the ones that have connections into you. Is a big deal, and that's a big problem. Kind of implied this, the asymmetric advantage that the bad guys have. It's pretty dramatic. Unfortunately, it's only getting bigger and badder with things like LLMs that can take the place of things like DGA. Domain generation algorithm is starting to fall off, while you can get something that doesn't have any kind of associations with each other. Big problems there. And then the big ugly 800-pound gorilla here is time wasting with IOC data lakes, which we all know about. I subscribe to a very interesting methodology, and it's funny, Trey, since I saw you many moons ago, I've gotten into the mode of being reductive in nature with security, not additive. Let's not pour more on this and feed more systems with more garbage, frankly. Let's distill. Let's spray luminol on things.
I think a lot of CFOs are in the same place. A lot of CISOs are being forced down that path. So I think that
100%. Yep, absolutely. So I won't dwell on this, because this really is a very generic articulation of a problem, but it kind of shows a process that I wanted to kind of illustrate, which is that there's the initial access, lateral movement, reconnaissance, which of course, is heavily slanted toward things like ransomware, which we all know is a real problem still, has been a problem forever, just gotten to be so prolifically profitable that people have really stuck with it. And then the third-party expansion piece, I really like to zero in on heavily.
All right, we're at our 5 minutes here, Karim.
Let's
good
to go.
So let's do the demo.
Fast.
Yeah, I know it's fast.
That's good.
So proprietary and confidential stuff.
That's good, because I actually get there quick.
Let's rock it.
Fantastic. We need the real gong, man. I was hoping for one of those.
Well, maybe I'll invest.
Get a cowbell.
Invest. Excellent. Good stuff. All right, let's get to the demo. So the platform is a SaaS-based platform. It is literally something that you can see. Can everyone see the screen?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, great. So this is the first thing you see when you roll into the dashboard, and it's pretty dramatic. You see a lot of big numbers. This is actually a live environment, so I can very quickly kind of zero in on what actually is causing this. Now, very quickly, what you're looking at here, as far as all these dots, is actual malicious communication egressing from organizations that have been infected with malware all around the world in the last hour. So this is not something that's days or weeks of collection. This is the last hour. So pretty dramatic. This is just nice eye candy for the most part. Where it gets interesting is when you start looking at the volume of traffic over time and how we do this. And again, the key part here is we go after the infrastructure the threat actor set up. Most specifically, DNS fast flux threat types. That's our focus. And what we're able to do is get those redirected to us with proper evidence. So if we can say this particular domain is being used maliciously, we can have that domain, we call it defected, which I love that term because it's very appropriate. We're taking infrastructure originally intended to be malicious, is still malicious by definition, but is now working as a double agent for us. So these are kind of high-level views.
Let's make sure that the audience is following us, because I know quite a bit about what's going on here, but I'm not sure everyone's going to understand exactly all those words you said in the combination you used them. So explain fast flux and how you're doing what you're doing, I think is going to be sort of the big aha for people listening.
Yeah, absolutely. So threat actors, as we generally know, are trying to build resiliency and redundancy with their ability to communicate with their deployed implants, right? Malware. They need to have some means. If they simply have that malware communicate to an IP address, you're limiting your ability to have it sustain, right? There's a fairly well versed technology team that doesn't allow communications out to unknown places can kill it in its tracks. But having it bounce around to different command and control endpoints, be it domains that can be constantly fluxed, hence the term fast flux, you can keep it alive for a lot longer, and you can keep adapting it and modifying it. And it makes it a lot harder because, as we probably all know, DNS is still this black box to a lot of folks. They generally say, well, it's a necessary evil, but we don't really know much about it. We're not going to collect the logs because there's too much garbage in it. It is the holy grail, in my opinion, of being able to find out where things are coming from and where they're going and how they're actually manifesting. So what we're doing is we're looking for the endpoint, not man-in-the-middling it, because that's a key aspect here. What we're looking for is the endpoint of where that malware is calling home to. And we're actually, I'm going to be a little bit cavalier with the statement, we're taking over that endpoint that threat actor has set up so that we can be the recipient of the communication from the malware when it's in the wild. So when a malware gets deployed into, God forbid, company X, and it calls out to say the eagle has landed, we are receiving that communication along with the threat actor that has all the other domains set up in that way. Hopefully
So
that kind of illustrates it.
So in this way, just to pull on that thread,
Yeah.
you're not theoretically seeing something that's bad. You're actually seeing the real traffic beaconing out to you specifically because
Yes.
it has been fooled into believing you are part of the botnet.
Precisely it. Exactly. And the power that affords us is understanding now, in fairness, post-compromise, that someone has just gotten malware. It's not preemptive per se. There are some things that we do that are somewhat preemptive, but that's a key part, that we've seen the thing land, deploy, embed itself, and now try to communicate out through the network of that organization. And I'll say something that obviously is no one ever likes to hear, but if we see it, it means the security of that organization is essentially failed. Because by definition, the whole point is to limit those communications, not only inbound, but outbound. So when we see something, and all these numbers are the illustration of what you just said, Robert, that there's an immense amount of compromise going on a regular basis that, unfortunately, whether we like it or not, is persistent and consistent and growing. So,
let's press on that for just a second, Karim, because I think there's a couple important points you've buried here. So when we talk about command and control, this is a malicious actor, a threat actor that has got some sort of infrastructure now set up in your environment. You're monitoring DNS targets, how it's controlling that infrastructure is going to be moving. That's the fast flux element. Now there are layers to failure. And I think that, when we look at incident response, we look at postmortems, there's not a single point of failure. There's contributing causes or deficiencies. But even PCI, a number of other standards have pushed for egress filtering. DNS is particularly hard to filter. A lot of folks have worked with it. It's not DNS, it's always DNS. I love that you're looking into this, but what this gets into now is your ability to contain post identification. So every vendor, every snake oil pitch talks about how everything we bring you is 100% signal, but you're saying you are so focused on one, DNS, number two, tracking this infrastructure. You're identifying signals that may not be malware. It could be targeted malware. It could be totally custom stuff. It could be run-of-the-mill stuff, but you've got a degree of confidence. Can you talk a little bit more about why you bring that level of confidence? Because everyone's like, we're all signal. We're only telling you what matters. Can you tell me more about that?
That's a great point. In fact, I even go so far as to say is that while DNS is hugely important to the process, it's no longer a great signal because it's usually off site from the organization that's being victimized. So you're not getting last mile. So in no way was I suggesting that DNS is the end all be all for where the victim may be, but we need it because in our case, and Trey, that's a perfect segue to what we really do that's quite magical. And that's kind of the next thing I'm going to show you in the time that we have. DNS is a good starting point because it lets us know that something has manifested somewhere and it's calling out to a domain that we now have control of. But the part that makes it very interesting is we actually answer that malware with an IP address of our designation. And that affords us a full three-way handshake with that malware. And that's where our legal limit ends effectively. From that point on, we hand off to law enforcement for the more aggressive stuff that you can probably let your imagination run wild with. But in that step, we get an immense amount of intelligence back from it. And I kind of have it pulled up to kind of show you a little bit of that. So that's an entity search, which we'll come back to. But this is an example of data that we're getting because we've actually had that malware communicate back with us saying, thank you for the response to my initial request through DNS. I am now here and I've now sending information back. And I have this. Let me see if I can share my entire screen so this is a little bit better, because I want you guys to see the whole thing. Okay. Now you can see this blob of data that came out, and this came from this IP address to us from India. And if you look at this glob, those that have seen plenty of these things from a forensic standpoint can recognize what's in there. This is just obfuscated data that literally has had question marks put into it to hide what's really there, which is that this individual on this machine with a US keyboard setting has a Windows 11 Enterprise running on it. And in fact, we can even see where that malicious file actually resides on the system, and it's harvesting and stealing data from that particular machine. Again, this is a key point, Trey, to your point. We're getting this data without any kind of deployed agent, sensor, proxy, anything. We're actually having the malware betray itself and share information with us about where it is and what it's doing and to what degree and velocity and cadence it's actually egressing, information like this. This ties to the materiality of the information we're getting. Now, far be it from me to say that company X is materially breached, because I don't really know their business model or what really is valuable to them. But when I can say, hey, there's actual data leaving, it's not just that you have malware beaconing to a DNS endpoint, which is what we used to do for many, many years. This is where that fidelity comes in, and that's where it starts. As you said very accurately, I have a very high confidence that there is something residing there. It is now taking information and sending it back to an endpoint that it believes to be its owner. So this is a good example of the kind of data that we can collect. As I move this out of the way and scroll down, you can see there are several others that are there that are, copies of the same thing. Here's another good example of that. That's kind of looks like it's harvested a username and password stash from some sort of Chrome browser for access. So information stealers are likely what they're responsible for this. So this is sort of the key part of this product. This is what I was telling Robert before this call, the money shot of this whole thing, because all this work that we do up to this point is fantastic and interesting to the guys that like to hunt. But for the customer side of the house, or the usage to say, oh, good Lord, my email address or my data has shown up either in another organization's cache. So think of it like a deep and dark web scan happening in real time, rather than trying to find it collated and
you're catching
delivered
this
on a
entry
page
point,
bin.
not the post facto, like have it been
Right
found or other outlets.
Correct.
How do you capture this? Where do you live? Where are you hooked in? What does that
Yeah.
look like?
So I live in the ether on the internet, not inside the firewall.
I'm
Outside.
from the internet. No, but really.
I'm from the internet. So when I'm able to get the redirection to happen by way of getting the domain pointed to me, I now control the endpoint. So if you want to think of it, another kind of cheeky way of suggesting is that I'm not man-the-middling traffic like NetFlow might be considered, right? Where you're plugged in and you're tapping data off a span of some kind and you're reading it all. I'm actually man at the terminus, because I'm receiving the communication and then having that malware communicate to an IP address of my designation, basically to a mock C2, if you want to think of it that way. And that's how I'm able to collect that traffic that's going outbound, not only to me, but also to all the other domains that I have not implicated. Key tradecraft point here. We don't go after everything. So we're not trying to emulate law enforcement and take all these things down. Our goal is to infiltrate, lurk, see what's being exfiltrated so that we can help the victims in a more curative fashion. The trade, that answer your question about where we actually are, because it's
I don't want you to give away your TTPs
no
or your internal tradecraft, but that's a much better picture of where you're capturing this.
Yeah.
There's a layer of hocus pocus that you can't unveil, but that is that's a great hook.
I had a question as I was watching this that I didn't think about until I saw it. Just great reason to do a demo, right? Yeah. So let's say Gmail is kind of a terrible example, but let's say the email they had captured was like, let's say it was Microsoft and it was a Microsoft email address or something.
Sure.
I'm assuming I don't have to narrow it just to my IP ranges. I could just say, hey, do you find Microsoft stuff anywhere across any of these IP ranges? Because we might have people in coffee shops. We might have people, all over the random internet. Yeah. I don't want to have to always just be looking at my IP addresses. No. I want it to be more of like a trawler and just grab anything with my PII anywhere on the internet.
That's right. That's exactly it. So the goal with this particular view, which was intended to be the ability to say, well, let me look through whatever sort of collected information there is, whether it's the headers or the payload. There is a little bit here that I will say it's not quite the answer yet. I will get to it because I want to just touch on this. Everybody that's watching that is familiar with the way this is going to say, well, this is all great, but malware communicates in an encrypted fashion with its command and control. What are you doing about that? We solve for that. So we actually issue a let's encrypt cert that's a wildcard to the malware. So it thinks it's actually talking to its legitimate endpoint. So we actually get decrypted data. We don't have to decrypt it. We basically get it because we're issuing the certificate that it's meant to communicate with. And that gives us an immense amount of information. So to your point, Robert, if we're looking for a keyword here or some sort of regular expression or string of some kind, we can find it. Now, mind you, it takes a little bit of power to do that. There's some crunching that has to be done here. But the way we'll typically handle things is we can't boil the ocean all the time because, as you can see, this is just a steady flow of information flowing in from the world that's infected. So we're kind of digging into this world of data and we're saying, find me this word, and it gives you this insanely large thing. So the way we solve for that is with watch lists, and we'll do one together here in the demo, which I thought would be good, provided we have time.
Yeah.
So let's do this. I'm going to use this use case for the product. This is one that's sort of an ancillary use case. We didn't get into that. Maybe we'll get into it in Q&A. But security validation is a big one. And a lot of people will say, well, how do I know like the security products I'm using? So I will pick on a security company for a minute. I'm going to pick on OpenDNS, and it's not their fault. It's just the nature of the problem. So for example, let's see what OpenDNS egress we're seeing in Vigilocity, which is really interesting, right? Because technically speaking, if they're up to date and they have all the latest and greatest kind of blocking and tackling to Trey's point, stopping the communications out to these DNS endpoints, we should see nothing. So if I go and say, well, let's go and add all OpenDNS that I can find, and this is a little bit, and Robert, you'll smile when you see this, this is a little bit attack surface-esque in our collection.
I was going to say the attack surface management and this are like peas and carrots.
Hugely.
Yeah.
So this is our very crappy little version of what you do very, very well. But this gives us something, right? It gives us a thread to pull on the sweater. So these are essentially CIDRs or net blocks that we know belong to said organization to the best of our ability, and we'll add them in. And what will happen there is
if I was OpenDNS, I could add it better, let's say.
Very much so.
If I had a more sophisticated way to know that information.
100%. So this is one way to kind of set a watch list in motion to continuously monitor a set of entities, or if you wanted to add a flat IP space, CIDR range, or even domains for that matter, you'll do so. And what this will do is on a regular churn, so probably every 4 or 5 minutes, it'll run through all these and say, have we seen anything historically? And all of a sudden you'll see, actually, if I refresh it, yep, there's matches. So instantly we are able to see, oh yeah, this entity, which has these IPs, the last traffic we saw was today from this IP. So we can click that IP and we can go immediately to the where in the world that thing egressed from, which is in Warsaw, and we can see what was beaconing out from it. And these are the malware families that we're calling out to those domains on the side at these exact times, which is pretty compelling from a visualization standpoint. So now
and the reason this works in OpenDNS is because they're proxying a bunch of traffic, right? That's why that works. Yeah. Okay.
My genuine hope is that these are tests of communications outbound by their sandboxing. I certainly hope it is not their customers that are getting to these endpoints, because that would not be a very good record of the organization's success there. But hopefully this makes sense. So really, this is our traffic seen from an IP that belongs to OpenDNS, because of malware families that you saw here that are responsible for those communications outbound. But let's do one more deeper, and Trey, this is the cringe moment. Let's go to the entity search, which is always fun. And, I had an interesting conversation, and again, I could pick any company in the world here and pretty much pop it in the search, and we could see if something shows up or not. And again, in the spirit of transparency and per what we said in the beginning of this conversation, one that I think is a very good example of a company that's done its best to try to protect itself is a company like SoftBank, right? And I won't go too deep into this, but I will give you kind of a sense of what this looks like. So if we type in the word SoftBank, we can immediately see, yes, this organization matches the string that we searched for. Is this the one you're looking for with the domain that's associated with it? And then, the last time we saw a DNS call, and unfortunately, we'll call it payload delivery, was today.
With 97.
So that would allow us to go, So we're able to kind of go quickly to that and take a look, which is quite startling in many cases. And typically when we engage with customers, we'll build out what we call their company page. That looks a little bit like this. I took the pleasure of pulling up the unfortunate situation with United Healthcare. And I want to disclaim something. In no way am I suggesting that we 100% saw what was probably going on that originated. That probably was not a malware that resulted in their ransomware attack. But I will say that there was an IP that we did see, ironically, in June, which was kind of interesting. So if you look at this, within this CIDR, this IP on June 7th we witnessed a communication from it. Now, because we hold so much data, we have to sort of offload and push it offline into cold storage for obvious reasons. But fascinating data point, certainly in retrospect, right? Because if you can say, hey, does this lend some visibility retrospectively into what might have transpired to result in some sort of weakness?
I guess
so while
you
have to, I was going to say, while you have to push it off in cold storage, I'm assuming you have an API of some sort. So if I was, let's say, like an insurance broker or something, and I wanted to see the history of a company over time to kind of get a trend analysis of what I should expect out of their environment, one exploit a month, one exploit a year, or whatever, one piece of malware beaking out per year, whatever.
Absolutely.
Okay. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a huge part of this product. It is the ability to see the historicity of its ability to manage compromise, not vulnerability, right? I always have to kind of sidestep that and be like, no. I don't do any kind of scanning or checking to see if there's a CVE that's screaming from the other patch management issue or whatever. No. I have no business in that world. I am there to say the organization has been grappling and putting fires out consistently. In many cases, we'll see organizations with what looks like a heartbeat spark line, because they're constantly finding problems, killing them, finding new problems, killing them. It just looks like this heartbeat.
And that's the process, right? That's the game. So
it is.
Even an organization with really good hygiene, they may be targeted. I mean, one of the conversations that CISOs have with the board all the time is, why would someone target us? And the counterfactual, I think, conversation is that, 10 or 15 years ago, we talked about botnet wranglers, and there were the folks that would grant access to specific populations of initial footholds. And at this point now, we're thinking about this as access brokers. And these are granting, whether it's session tokens or actual malware implants inside of an organization. What you're reporting here isn't a vulnerability. We're seeing signal that there's something beaconing back for control inside of your organization.
Right. Exactly right. And it's interesting. I'm going to go totally in reverse on something, because one of the areas that specifically the insurance industry has asked me to look at, they really got excited about the materiality piece, because they said this is helpful because, to your point, it's 100% needed to have augmented information and intelligence on whether the organization not only has managed their vulnerability status, or what I like to call their immune system. Are they grappling with a disease of some kind, and a chronic one at that? And then even further, is there a way for us to understand the proclivity for an organization to be on the radar? So we've added this in, which is pretty interesting, which is in the corpus of data that we collect, we can see the similar domains that have been registered. I don't want to say maliciously yet, but very suspiciously, that may have been utilized in some sort of phishing effort, right? So there's an ability to kind of say, from the earliest stages of a campaign, if you want to think of it from the life cycle of an attack, they're going to start off with trying to get their hooks into something and get some sort of social engineering effort underway and deploy first stage malware, to your point, access brokerage, exactly that. So very powerful.
I think to your heartbeat thing you were just talking about for a second there. one of the things I think that the industry is not really paying that close attention to is the dwell time.
Mm-hmm.
Because the longer you leave malware there, the more likely it is to do something bad. Usually it's something crazy, like 6 months or something on average
Yeah.
before they actually start doing the bad thing.
Right.
So yeah, you got malware today, but if you take care of it today, the bad thing might not actually occur, or you might lose one credential or a set of
Yeah.
credentials, but the whole company is not going to get compromised. You still have some cleanup work to do. It's not like you get it for free, but in terms of like an insurance provider, if they
Yeah.
could go in and say, hey, look, we see this malware on your environment, but we don't care so much, but we do care that you don't take care of it immediately. So go do that, because with what that does is it reduces the losses for that insurance carrier. And so
Yes.
that helps their bottom line. I could see why this would be really attractive to them.
Right. Exactly. And it's a persistent check, if you want to think of it that way too, which is to say, someone said something quite clever. They said, this is the first thing I've seen for the cyber insurance industry that is what the X-ray, the MRI has been for the health insurance industry. It changed the game hugely for them because there was no need to get questionnaires filled out. And did you ever smoke a cigarette in your life? And the 2-pack-a-day guy says, never once. And then they got the policy back in the good old days. And now, well, X-rays don't lie. And in some ways, because this is so non-invasive, I don't ever have to communicate with the organizations that we're looking at to get a sense of it. I don't like to suggest that we know everything. To your point, RSnake, this is the whole idea of saying, let's go communicate with the organization, make sure we're getting the entire attack surface to the best of their ability, or maybe work with an organization like yours to figure out what that entire surface looks like. But this gives them a huge amount of visibility that they otherwise wouldn't have. Because someone asked me something really interesting. They said, how much of a corollary is there between what you see and what a vulnerability assessment company sees? Is there a corollary? And I said, not usually.
Not
Sometimes
really, right? Almost
no,
never.
almost never. And people are like totally confused when I say that. But the truth is, vulnerability is not an indication of compromise. It sounds silly to say that, but it's just not. And while some of the most heinously vulnerable organizations sometimes just never get hit, and it's absurd, and I don't see them. So people are like, how is it possible that they have everything wrong with their patch management cycles, but there's nothing wrong with them from your view?
That's
Different threat actors.
Windows
Yep.
3.1.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's a million reasons, but it's an interesting thing because people think, well, if I have one, then I probably know what you see. I'm like, no, and vice versa. So we're not replacing that by any stretch.
Well,
we're not.
This is another thing people get wrong about the insurance industry a lot. They think that they care about vulnerability. They only care about loss.
Yeah.
And so what creates loss is the only thing they care about. And so, yeah, there's 100 million vulns out there. Who cares? Mm-hmm. There's only about 100, let's call it, that actually end up creating an actual loss where they end up having to pay out. Yeah. And so if this is a faster way to get there and say, look, I really don't care about vuln scanning. And by the way, that's dangerous and time consuming, and it's a lot of data, and I don't know what I'm really looking at, and I don't know how to stack rank things. And there's a whole bunch of problems with prioritization. This just gets all of that out of the way. You can just say, all right, I want to know what is currently hacked in my environment now. Right. Ready, set, go.
Exactly. And at minimum, it provides a thread to pull, right? Because that's one of the things that we were trying to get the point across, which is that, okay, if not for your own organization, then look at your third-party periphery. Is it absolutely hemorrhaging? Because if you're a defense contractor, for example, and you have 10 real core, we'll call them subcontractors or NGOs that you're working with, and they're just absolutely ravaged. Well, here's the scary part. Those are usually not party like to just you. They're probably servicing the entire defense industrial base. So in a lot of ways, by figuring out where the cyber typhoid Mary is in the equation, which may not be you, you can limit the exposure to all of your peers and kind of mitigate the problem at a bigger scale. And that's a very interesting view. For example, when I did this the other day, and I won't do it for sort of NDA reasons, but I looked at an aircraft maintenance organization that I didn't realize has control over pretty much every airline. Not control. They do the maintenance for all these airlines, and they're horrific. I mean, and so it's sort of like that's the ultimate golden goose for a threat actor to get into one of those guys and then bounce their way into all the spokes connected to that hub. And this illuminated it hugely for these guys. So it took one partner to sort of say, look at this supply chain partner of mine, look at this contractor. And we did, and they're like, oh, good Lord. And then they were the ones that informed me that everyone uses them. And I said, really? And so that's obviously very interesting information beyond just the one customer use case. It becomes more
this, again, it may not have
prolific.
to do with their hygiene, right? They may be a CIS
Correct.
level, minimum 1, maybe 2 level hardened, properly patched, properly configured. They've got a lot of things happening, but this is a post facto, post exploit, post in situ point of visibility. And so
precisely
in an incident response scenario, we're always looking for the initial patient zero.
Yeah.
You actually have an opportunity to disrupt or drive up cost on the work.
Yeah.
In the middle of an attack, you may be able to stop a campaign. This is a very interesting high signal. I'm sure this is not cheap, but a very important data point for folks that are looking to identify what's happening here, right?
You certainly, and this is true of all of the vendors, you don't have to talk about pricing, but
sure.
I'm assuming the pricing would have to be quite a bit higher because you give them full access to everything, or do you have a way to limit it to say you're only allowed to look at certain things and that dictates the price?
Yep, you're looking at the admin version of this, which is kind of the holy grail. In fact, we joke, we call the blue side the hunt side that we only see or very few customers see, and the pink side sort of the onboarding customer side of it, where we have companies that are all built out there and whatnot, and the watch list as you saw here, for example. So we do have it parceled off. So if you're just interested in your first party environment, whatever that may be, or if you were interested in your global view, if you're a multinational organization, you can buy a license to look at that and look at all those IPs in Italy and LA and New York. Or if you're just absolutely sold on this idea that you want to be able to not only protect yourself from yourself, but also from your partners, we sell a third-party package with it that sort of scales based on how many third-party partners. And we're limitless on that. You could look at third, fourth, fifth, nth party. We don't care. It's really whatever IP space is of interest. Because it's not a burden on our system when it comes to our cost of goods effectively is not customers. It's our pursuit of the bad guys. So our costs are our costs. In fact, the customers simply bring our profit margins higher every time we bring them on because they essentially they
your
feast
overheads,
off
infrastructure,
the
and access and durability for that visibility.
Right.
The tradecraft side is where you're, makes sense.
So only adding new features would increase your costs. So
exactly right.
Everybody carries that burden equally.
Yeah. I'll show you one more thing, Robert, because I promised it as far as this sort of the we'll call it the old trope of minority reporting on finding the pre-crime sort of side of it. And Trey said this, it was really interesting. DNS is tough because it's hard to block and tackle, especially because you're generally having to wait for some sort of evidence to support why the domain is bad and all that. And we certainly need that for our pursuits of these domains, right? We can't go after anything that doesn't have any evidence associated with it. That would be very impetuous and a little bit cavalier. But we've built something that we think is quite interesting.
I want to come back to that mythic intelligence. I just noticed that. Please keep going, but I just saw that. I want to ask about that. Keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. There's mythic intelligence and mythic scan, which is these are the tools that our own internal team uses to make a determination of what an organization looks like from a threat actor's perspective, which is interesting. So it's intended to sort of say, if we're going to see egress come from somewhere, where would it probably come from? And that's what gives us that visibility. But here's a really, really interesting one. And this is sharing some pretty interesting data. I had a really very, very colorful demo about a month ago with a SOC leader that was very tired. He was really frustrated. He had so many people pitch him more IOC feeds that he just was done. And so he was half listening to my demo. And I got to the point where I showed him a domain of some kind. I said, look, this domain is obviously malicious. He goes, stop the demo. Thank you so much, Karim. Appreciate your time, but really, I'm not interested. I went and I checked out that domain and I found it in my, Anomaly, Recorded Future, whatever product that he had there. And I said, okay, time out. I'm glad you did. Because if you didn't find that domain in any of those, then you got bigger problems that I can help you with. So I'm glad you went and checked that out. That's not what I'm selling here. I said, but will you humor me and allow me to do a quick experiment? And he's like, okay. I said, all right. So we went to this page and I said, all right, look for this domain. And he did. 5 minutes later, he's like, yep, I found it. And I said, is it a hook C2 domain? He goes, yeah, everybody knows it is. I was like, yeah, everybody does. That's why I have it here listed as a known domain that we went after. But go look for this one. And he did. And he's like, I don't know that one. I said, what about this one? This one. We went down about 10 or 15. They said, because none of these domains have any kind of IOCs associated yet, because they're not weaponized. They're tied to the same threat actor group. They're part of the same ecosystem. There's no evidence to support their pursuit, but they're certainly viable enough to be sent to companies to limit communication to them in advance. So we ran a really cool experiment about a month ago, which is we gave this list to a telco that actually employed it. It was a little risky because we don't want people limiting their business, right? And some of these are good by chance, which can happen. Admittedly, I want to be very, very honest about this, but the vast majority of them are LLM created domains based on a very clear, and we can even tell because we see when they're registered, we see the timestamps associated with when they're registered and all the other garbage associated with the registration information. And believe it or not, they deployed this into their DNS filtering. 1 week goes by, and then a week and a half goes by, and they're like, we got our first one. One of the domains that never had anything ever communicate to it tried, and we were able to figure out exactly which machine it was, and we found a brand new binary repackaged of the same threat that the malware or the threat actor had redeployed to bypass all the internal security tools. So perfect use case of why we want to get preemptive with some of this data.
Nice.
Pre-crime, interesting.
Yeah.
Do you end up trying to take over some of the malware on those preemptively as well, or you wait until you know that they're starting to be used?
Standard SOP is wait. Every now and then I get a law enforcement nudge, which is wonderful. And they'll say, hey, here's some really cool information that you can share that isn't public that is worthy of taking out. However, we're very careful because this is a classic timing issue. If you go after something preemptively, you telegraph and you spook the threat actor, and they're gone into the shadows, and they start somewhere else, and you have to go hunt for them again. So we're generally, it sounds terrible to say it this way, but we kind of have to wait for some level of proliferation of that communication to start to happen, and maybe some casualties. I hate to say it that way, but that's kind of critical to know that we're not going after something too preemptively. And we want it to have resiliency, because the one thing we can count on with the bad guys is they're lazy and they're cheap, even if they have all the money in the world. And if they have a botnet that's working, they'll generally let it run even if they lose certain channels. It's like shrinkage. They expect some of the C2s to fall off due to abuse complaints. So we sort of function in that way, where we sort of live in their environment but allow it to survive. Sort of sounds terrible to say it this way. We parasite off them for a while to figure out who they victimized. And then if they move on, great. But the whole goal here is to kind of keep these things alive as long as we can, so we can see who the victims are. Because I'm trying to get to the point where Trey's going, which is the only real way to solve for this isn't to go take all the C2 servers offline, because they'll just move to a bigger botnet. The idea really is to go be curative and remove the actual infection off these machines inside these victim environments, which is what we're highlighting.
So I was going to ask a question about authentication, and I didn't see anything, but I just wanted to get your take before I pass over this.
Sure.
Do you have like a tiered authentication? Is there a reason why you'd have like rules set up where you, one of Trey's questions I like is, if you have two users and one has a watch list and the other one doesn't, and they leave, what sort of happens, and like, how does it all work?
Yep. So everyone is compartmentalized as multi-tenant. And it's tiered. So there's an admin for, say, the company that can have the global view of all watch lists for all of their staff. And then each individual person with effectively a user account has their own watch list. Those watch lists can be exported and re-imported into another employee's system, if you will. So, for example, in the watch list that we created together here, there's a way to sort of export this data to very quickly move it to someone else to see. As you probably noted here, there's a little alert thing here. And that does say, hey, something new just popped up. And we're working right now on how to toggle that a little bit and build a volume knob rather than an on and off switch for it, because we need to say, and we all know this from IR, we don't need a constantly screaming thing that says, oh, no, new, constantly. So we actually built it to where it's like, no, marked it as red. I don't want to hear about this one again. I know about it. It's my sandbox. I'm done. And it'll shut up forever. And that's a very big part of the value of the product, which is quite nice. Not sure if I answered your question, Robert, but yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I guess my follow-up question is then I could see a situation where a MSSP might really like this because they would be able to look across, dozens or hundreds of different companies without having to really install a bunch or do a lot of heavy lifting. It's just it works out of the box. You flip a switch in some service contract somewhere and you get this for free almost, since they already have a contract with you.
Absolutely. That's probably the best conduit to customers, because if the MSSP is worth their salt and they've got the means to go and actually take action on the alerts that pop up, this could be very, very effective, because it'll give them first alerting of something that maybe is brewing. To your point about dwell time, if we can get an MSSP tuned in on this to say, oh, look, a Cobalt Strike deployment, malicious one that's been deployed, has just landed. Let's get this thing at least triaged and mitigated, and then we'll go remove it before it actually is able to give information back to its operator that will then take that next stage of deploying ransomware. 100%. This last screen, sort of before we pull off the demo, is really interesting, and we've enhanced it quite a bit. This is a country level view of how things look, right? And it's pretty fascinating. And many, many, many times we'll see something geopolitical happen, and we'll see it translate in the communications of malware globally, which is super cool, because I'll watch a Putin speech, or I'll see something declared by the North Koreans, and then it'll be like, for whatever reason.
Or the Olympics or something, right? Any sort of big national
Olympics, very good example of that, right? So in fact, that's a good one. We should just, for the sake of France, let's just see how France looks, maybe compared to Germany, whatever. Just, this is arbitrary, and I'm just popping it in there. And now you can kind of see, France has been pretty level as far as numbers of IPs that we've seen. But Germany had some spikes over that period of time, and France has been level. Not what I would expected. Sometimes what you think you're going to see, you don't. Other times you see some absurdly interesting stuff, and you're like, what is going on? I literally have to go either to like X or the news or something and be like, all right, type this word in, and go, oh, that's why Maduro said something to Elon, and therefore explosion.
You need some Venezuela in there.
Actually, why not? Let's keep this fun. Yeah. So what's really fun about this is that you can kind of look at things, from a very unique perspective. Yeah. So that's fascinating.
Well, hello.
Yeah. So we went from literally 4,000 to 334,000 data. That's data exfiltrating that country. That's not DNS calls. That's actual data egressing, which is pretty interesting. Just that day, July 20th. So I have to be a little smarter about my politics and go read what happened there. But we can go a little further. We can say, let's go look at Venezuela in general. These are the organizations that are responsible for that traffic, and the most prolific IPs that we've seen due to the traffic that's coming out. So you can see the rabbit hole that this product sort of creates. It's a huge time.
Was that in July? Go back to that prior view.
I think it was. Yeah.
I think the election was late July.
Oops. I went back to the original one. Venezuela, right? Yeah. Yep. It's a nice snappy platform too. That makes me happy, because I can't stand waiting. July 20th.
Late July. Yeah. So the election was the 28th. So yeah, that's a fascinating
leading up to the election. Interesting.
Yeah.
Huh. Okay. Well, conspiracy theorists roll.
Yeah, we lit the wick on that one. So
did.
But yeah, guys. So there's plenty more, and Trey brought up some really interesting stuff. The hunt stuff is super fascinating. This is sort of worthy of its own level of conversations. I didn't want to bring it up too much, because we would end up kind of we'd lose kind of the color of the whole platform with just that alone with the guys like us on this call. But really, really interesting stuff to look at there. But hopefully this gives you guys a good sense of the product. It's different.
Yeah. Who ultimately is sort of the perfect user of this? Is it threat hunting teams? I could even see IT teams. Like, who do you generally end up selling to?
So funny, really funny. I thought I would get inundated with a lot of, kind of classic IR groups and all that. And it partially could be just that I'm not advertising this thing very much. I've kept very quiet, kind of building this and have very, very specific clients. It's, believe it or not, the big guys, the big four that are using things for like due diligence on companies to figure out how they're faring, which dovetails directly into the insurance story we just talked about. So it's really more business use cases
and M&A, right?
and M&A.
I really don't want to be buying a company that's full of malware.
Nope. You want to,
or at least clean it up first, you know.
if we could have existed with the Marriott Starwood deal, that would have been really fascinating, right? Because we could have possibly mitigated some of that carnage that ensued after that. So it's really them. It's less the tactical folks, hence why there's so much eye candy in this product. There's obviously an API, as I showed you here, which satisfies the teams that need to just ingest data into their pane of glass. I think all the veterans that you brought on your show so far, we all know that we don't expect to be the pane of glass for the customer, nor do I. But this is really good eye candy for a C-suite. And then this allows the teams to kind of work actionably behind the scenes on mitigating it. So much so that they actually get to see the traffic go from this bumpy heartbeat to a flat line, which articulates that, hey, you did a proper IR. It didn't pop back up. We're confirming it didn't actually show back up.
What was the Mythic scan? I don't think we saw that.
Yeah, so this is, and you'll smile. So let's keep this fun. Give me any domain in the world.
Cisco.com.
All right. This does a very fast look at everything that you know a ton about, guys. But it gives me a really good sense of what I'm dealing with here as far as any kind of SPF records that might be exploited. Fascinating stuff there. Any domain info as far as who's the registrar behind it. If I need to maybe get in a conversation with these guys, many times I'll get subdomains, any kind of passive DNS data. It's all stuff that you could do yourself. There's nothing about this that's unique to us, but it compiles it in such a way that makes it very helpful for my analysts to say, cool, what's happened here so far? What are we dealing with? What kind of things are going on here? Server statuses, social tags, security.txt files, crawl rules, global rankings as far as the organization is concerned, obviously stuff like open ports. So it's a light look at things, linked pages, which is really always interesting because this is nightmare fuel for phishing in many cases. So you can actually create very parallel URLs, URIs that can be used for phishing, headers, it goes on. And you can see it was pretty quick too. So this was
up just a little bit.
Sorry. Yeah, please.
Hold right there. Now the security policy. Okay, cool. I'm like, this is just a whole population of useful URIs and other.
And those are HTTP headers there. Yeah.
Juicy.
Yeah.
Something I hadn't thought about, Karim. So I was thinking about this from a detection response standpoint. What I didn't think about is post breach. One of the most dangerous questions to answer as a CISO, quarterbacking a live incident. All right, we've done our IR, we drew our sandbox, we've redone our sandbox, forensics is going, we're cleaning up. There's a real bad black water, brown water, clean water, sewer analogy as you're trying to clean up your environment. You make the dangerous decision or recommendation to bring things back online. How do you know? And forensics takes too long to make that call. Y'all are in an interesting place to turn on and say, no, we still see beacons. There's still buried C2. There's still an element here. I mean, it's not proof positive. It's not 100%, but we're basically the blind leading the blind, making a difficult call based upon hygienic decisions. And again, if we're targeted, we're talking about malware that won't signal on standard EDR or AV or other checks. This is a signal source. That's fascinating.
Well
said.
I
don't know how else to answer that question.
No, it's beautifully said, because part of the idea with saying, if it's managing to get out through your proverbial firewall, put that as a high priority, right? Because it's one thing to have a bunch of Zeek sensors on the inside of the network waiting to see if anything maybe creeps across that you maybe can identify as bad, but you only know what you know. This is generally what you don't know. In fact, that's the hardest part about this company, because usually I'm calling people with things that they're not aware of, and they're trying to qualify it before they even give me the time of day.
Yeah, you sound like an ambulance chaser, which is a bit.
I do.
That's a rough sale.
It's rough because I'm effectively where the ambulance already is, which is kind of ironic.
You're not chasing the meat wagon. Gosh. Now, question: how long does it take for these signals to populate back into the system? Are we talking minutes, days, hours? Like a prayer committee has to meet. Like, how does that flow?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I have a really fun answer for this. So it varies, because this has to do with two things or two parameters. One is, how fast the action will be taken by the authoritative DNS. So that when they take the action on it, that can obviously be a parallax between when we take the action and when we see data. And then when the DNS propagates. Yeah. Yeah. And when the DNS propagates. And we had a situation 2 weeks ago. It's really, really funny. I did a demo, and I went a little deeper into the hunt side of the business, which we didn't go into in this particular demo because it's pretty in the weeds. And I said, oh, well, look, this is a good one. And it had a very high confidence rating for why we should go after it, because that's kind of how the system works. It says a lot of evidence, everybody in the world kind of concurs it's a bad domain. Let's just go after it. So I clicked to submit. It literally was a checkbox, and it was like off it went into the queue for the teams to take action on redirecting it. And I forgot to take it out of there. Normally at the end of the demos, I sort of just pull it back in and I say, well, we'll let the proper guys go do a proper analysis on it. Before I finished the demo, it was redirected, and we were seeing traffic from it. So wow. It was less than an hour, and that's hugely powerful. Now, we don't always guarantee that from an SLA standpoint. We don't want to overpromise, but that is indeed possible.
So Karim, that's actually my next question. Is there any sort of warranties or SLAs you have on your product that you want to talk about?
Yes. So we do have, if the tricky part here again is if it's in our vein of attack vectors, we will absolutely say, look, if something gets in there and communicates outbound, we'll see it. There's almost no we won't by definition, because it's trying to communicate with us. It's not like we're trying to look for it. It's this inverted model. The hard part with that, again, is we don't want to sort of suggest that we're the end all be all for all security problems, right? Because if someone's getting in through stolen credentials and there's no implants, we won't see it of any kind. So we just have to be very honest about this. Being security purists.
Love it.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. That's kind of what I thought you would say. But also, we're really close to end of time here.
Sure.
Do you have anything you want to talk about with the roadmap where you're really excited? This is something that's coming up.
I got a juicy one for that. So action-packed demo for you on this one, or for everything. I'm very excited about this. This is really, really something I've been waiting for a very long time to execute on. And I think we finally found a way. Because we have the communication with the malware directly, guys, we can't at scale, because of legal reasons and because we're not a government agency, take action on the machines that are infected at scale. Kind of like what an FBI might do.
Act sounds like a federal
100%.
thing you don't want to cross, for sure.
100%. We want to stay within our limits of this. And because we have such a beautiful ability to get scaled data every single day, we're not treasure hunting. We're not trying to find a flaw in a C2 panel to try to get into it. We're literally getting this on a regular basis. However, we finally got a really good feedback cycle back from a legal team within a company saying, well, if we sign a waiver that you can take action on machines in our network, not anyone else's, but if we give you a waiver, you can issue the self-destruct command to the malware and nuke it from orbit. That would almost, in a single felled swoop, almost create a completely new way of automated detection and response by way of using the malware against itself. Now, we have to be very careful. We have to do a proper level of RE on the malware. We got to make sure that when we do execute that removal command, it's not taking the network stack with it or anything terrible.
No kidding. The risk is enormous.
Yeah, exactly. We don't want to pull the tumor out and have the heart come with it.
Right, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So, but there is the ability to go either issue a new version of itself that will remove itself carefully. There's a whole slew of things that we can do because it's receptive to our communication. We just don't act on it today. But that's hugely in the roadmap, probably in 2025. Wow, that'll be pretty game changing.
That's very cool.
Okay, well, we are right up on time. So, cool. How do people get in contact with you and the company?
I am big on LinkedIn, as you know. That's probably my preferred social network at this point. I'm not a big Twitter or X guy. It's just too noisy these days. Or just go to vigilocity.com and feel free to fill out a contact form. I do respond to them. Team will respond to them. But again, thank you guys so much for the time today. It was awesome, and the questions were spectacular. It's always good to see you guys.
Karim, big pleasure. That was great. This is the first time I've seen the platform, actually, other than a couple of screenshots you shared on LinkedIn. So that's great. So please reach out to Karim if you want to see more or hear more, and really appreciate you coming on.
It was my pleasure. Thanks, guys.
See you.
Thank you.